All right, today we are continuing our message series on the Beatitudes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And we're beginning with Matthew chapter 5, and we're focusing today on verse 5, the third Beatitude or blessing. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. So, one time there was this preacher that went out inviting people to church. And he came to this one gentleman and he invited him to church. And the gentleman said, "I'm never going to go to church." He said, "Well, why not?" And the gentleman said, "Well, they're all hypocrites there." And to that the preacher said, "Well, there's always room for one more." Okay, for the record, that is not being meek. And it's not one of the best ways to witness to somebody. And I've seen a lot of bumper stickers on cars through the years that are put on by people professing to be Christians, and I'm not doubting that they are. I'm just saying it's not necessarily the best message. Sometimes these bumper stickers can be quite offensive in the way that they word things. And so there's nothing wrong with sharing our faith, and there's certainly nothing wrong with being proud of being Christians and reaching out to the world and witnessing to them with the truth. But we have to balance that truth with love. And that's something that I think that the church in general has a problem with sometimes. I have a problem also with being meek sometimes. For example, my ex-wife used to tell me that I had a pride problem. And I didn't see it. And, of course, I played with the band for many years. And we'd go out and I'd write songs and I'd be all excited about when our new CD was coming out, and I'd post it all over social media. And, I started doing some writing and I'd try to publish those. And she saw that as being prideful, that where I was proud of myself and trying to make a name for myself. And I saw it more as I was just trying to witness to people around me, and I was excited that I was being successful at it. And so that's something that I've had to look at myself over the years and examine. Was I being too prideful? And should I use that as a learning lesson to try to be more meek? One of my other problems with being meek is I can be irritable sometimes in the mornings, and particularly when I'm stressed. I'm not a morning person. I'm a night owl. I like to stay up late and then sleep in the morning when I can. And of course, that's not always something you can do, especially when you have a job through the week. And also when you have to get up early on Sunday morning to go to church. And I'm a procrastinator too, and I have to work on that. All my life I've had to work on that. Putting things off to the last minute. And that's something that I've worked on over the years to begin things a little bit earlier so that I'm not rushing myself and getting stressed at the last minute to where I become irritable. And people around me sometimes could testify to you that sometimes I can get pretty irritable and sometimes downright offensive when I'm stressed or when I'm just in one of those circumstances. But that's something that I'm working on. As it says, as the saying goes, Christians are not perfect, just forgiven. And so I'm working on that. That's one of my things. One of the ways that I'm finding ways to work on that is by finding quiet, alone time for myself for prayer and meditation. And that's not something that's always easy in today's world, today's society. It's so fast-paced, and we've got so much going on, and we've got the things that society expects from us that we do, and then we add onto that ourselves our own hobbies and interests and stuff that take up so much time, and it's hard to find the time to just sit down and relax. And so that's another thing to where I'm working on, is trying to work on that so that the meekness can come through when I'm not being stressed because I'm just pulled too thin. But let's start with defining the word meek. Merriam-Webster's dictionary lists the primary definition of meek as, quote, enduring injury with patience and without resentment, mild. And the secondary definition is deficient in spirit and courage, submissive. Now there's a fine line between these two definitions. And it's the difference between restraint and cowardice. While the weak may be cowardly and submissive, True meekness is defined by being strong enough to endure that which oppresses you. Jesus described himself as being meek. In Matthew 11:28 through 30, he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So biblical meekness is gentleness, kindness, humility. It is also a sign of strength. The meek care for others. And you can't provide comfort for the weary and burdened if you are weak. You have to be strong enough to secure the provisions before you can provide them. And Jesus was. And he did. Jesus said that if somebody strikes us on the cheek, we are to turn to them the other. And it's very easy to see that as being weak. But sometimes true strength is knowing that you have the ability to fight back, but choose not to. True power is knowing that you could turn the stones of the earth into bread, as Lucifer tempted Jesus, but you choose to endure your hunger rather than to tempt God. It's knowing that you could call down legions of angels to destroy your persecutors and set you free, but you chose instead to die on a cross rather than to blow your mission because you were too proud or weak-willed to endure the pain and humiliation. Jesus was not weak, but he was meek. He was the strongest and most powerful man to ever walk the earth, not because he had physical power and strength, although he did, but because he had self-control and inner strength. But like I said, Jesus isn't calling us to be weak spiritually or physically. Look at the Beatitudes, for example, the ones we've already covered earlier in the year. Number 1, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So how is Jesus going to give the kingdom of heaven to the poor in spirit unless he's strong enough to secure it for them? Number 2, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, in verse 4. How is he going to provide comfort for them unless he's strong enough to secure the power of protection? Verse 5, the one for today. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. How can he give us the earth if it's not within his power to take it in the first place? You see, he does have that power. He has the power and the authority and the strength to give these things. And he will take them, and he will give them as he promised. You see, Jesus was no pushover. He was meek, but he was never weak. He came the first time showing patience and restraint, but when he returns, things are going to be a little bit different. What do I mean? Well, let's look at our Old Testament reading. Psalm 37, verses 5 through 11. Psalm 37, 5 through 11. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It leads only to evil. For evil men will be cut off, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while, and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy great peace. So Jesus is kind and patient and long-suffering. But while his mercy is great, his sword of justice will not be restrained forever. He allows injustices to happen and the wicked to remain for a time because he is kind and patient and long-suffering. And he gives the oppressed the ability to endure while he gives the wicked their second and third and sometimes fourth and fifth chances. But his patience will soon turn to judgment as he balances mercy with justice. You see, Jesus wasn't always demure and submissive as we like to picture him. Like I said, he was no pushover. He was meek but not weak. And he even at times became angry. Mark 3:5 tells us where Jesus, quote, looked around at the Pharisees in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And in Matthew 21:12 and 13, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there because they were taking advantage of the people. It says, he overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. Sounds like his patience ran out. You see, Jesus is patient with the wicked, but he is also protective of the oppressed. In Matthew 18, verse 6, Jesus says, if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned into the depths of the sea. Wow. Wow. That's powerful. Jesus is saying that his judgment will be worse than a mafia hit. You know, we see in the movies where they they give you cement shoes, is what they call them. And Jesus is saying that his judgment can be worse than that. Woe to the world, it continues, because of the things that cause people to stumble, he continues. But things must come, such things must come. But woe to the person through whom they come. You see, Jesus is protective over the innocent, the oppressed, and the defenseless. See that you do not despise them, he says, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. And you don't want to upset the angels. Like the Incredible Hulk, you won't like them when they get upset or when they're angry. When provoked, they are bearers of the wrath of God. Now Jesus gladly endured the suffering imposed upon him, but he was quick to come to the defense of others. In the Garden of Gethsemane, you remember that story? And they came to arrest Jesus, and Peter pulled out his sword and went to attack them to defend Jesus. And Jesus told him to put away his sword because he knew that Peter's life was at risk, and he didn't want him to, quote, die by the sword. He told us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, that we may be children of our Father in heaven. That's Matthew 5:44. But we're also told in Psalm 82, verse 3, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Now people, I already mentioned this, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. People who know me will generally tell you that I'm an easygoing person. I don't pick fights. I don't hold grudges. I try to do the right thing and lead by a good example, although, of course, I don't always succeed. The only time I ever remember not forgiving somebody was when somebody in particular, and I won't name names, did something horrible to somebody that I loved. And I won't get into what he did, but I wrote the song Mouths of Babes to help me work on learning to forgive him. And you can do to me whatever you want, but you better not hurt somebody that I love. That's how I felt. It's like the 1979 Kenny Rogers song, Coward of the County. Remember that one? It's about a boy named Tommy whose father was in prison and begged him, promise me, son, not to do the things I've done. Walk away from trouble when you can. It won't mean you're weak if you turn the other cheek. I hope you're old enough to understand. Son, you don't have to fight to be a man. And Tommy kept that promise for 20 years until the Gatlin boys hurt the woman that he loved. And that day he proved that his meekness wasn't weakness. And the story ends with him saying, I promised you, Dad, not to do the things you've done. I walk away from trouble when I can. Now please don't think I'm weak. I didn't turn the other cheek. And Papa, I sure hope you understand. Sometimes you gotta fight when you're a man. President Teddy Roosevelt demonstrated the concept of meekness when he described his approach to foreign policy as, quote, speak softly and carry a big stick. Now this is kind of how I picture Jesus, the strong, silent leader type. Not that he didn't speak his mind, he certainly did, and he did a lot of that. But he spoke with kindness, compassion, patience, and understanding. Likely with a soft or reassuring voice a lot of times. But also the rugged shepherd type with his shepherd's crook at the ready to gently prod his sheep in the right direction, or to physically defend them from attacking predators. Moses is described in Numbers 12, verse 3, as the meekest person at that time. He was this soft-spoken, backwards-appearing type who had learned to be meek. You see, he started out as a prince of Egypt, and I've talked about Moses before, and I'll go into more detail about this some other time. But he started out rich and privileged with a superior education and a strong sense of pride. But God led him to develop the attitude of a shepherd, the strong but meek leader who protects his flock while caring for them with a gentle hand. As it says in James 3:17, the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Verse 13 describes the humility that comes from wisdom. So we are all called to be humble, submissive, sincere, and full of mercy, not envious, prideful, boastful, and greedy with selfish ambition. And it concludes in verse 18, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. We read earlier in Psalm 37:5, commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. And James 1:19-20 says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Notice the common thread that keeps coming up to balance the attributes of meekness. It's righteousness and justice. And that's the very next beatitude that we're coming up on next week. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So let's commit our ways to the Lord and trust in him. Be still and wait patiently for him, and hope in the Lord, because we will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. And that's from verse 37. So next week we'll pick up where we left off with the search for righteousness. Let us pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for your love, your compassion, and your mercy. We thank you for being the meek yet powerful leader who watches over us with a gentle hand, but also has the crook at ready to defend the weak and the needy and the persecuted from their oppressors. Lord, we pray that you will help us to find in ourselves and to develop an attitude of meekness so that we also will be your representatives of mercy and justice and kindness and strength in a world that so desperately needs to be more like you. Help us to be that good example. And we just thank you for watching over us and helping us to grow every day to be more and more like you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.